Pope Leo XIV calls for disarming during Lebanon visit and Hezbollah's crisis of legitimacy. Why Hezbollah's pick-me energy backfired. Papal visits to Lebanon have always been moments when the country pauses, even though briefly, to look at itself through an external moral lens. In a region where political positions are often treated as existential identities, the Pope's presence carries symbolic weight. It forces competing factions to recalibrate how they see themselves, both internally and to the rest of the world. If you don't believe me, read this Washington Peace post from 28 years ago when John Paul II visited. It's as if it was written today. Quote, Washington Post, Beirut Muslims and Christians greet Pope who calls for reconciliation. The part I'm interested in, it says, in southern Beirut, a stronghold of the radical Shiite group known as Hezbollah, a poster welcoming the Pope appeared alongside a mural of Iran's late spiritual leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He's coming to see the Lebanese, not Christians or Muslims, says Nada Atwa 28, a Shiite Muslim from southern Beirut, as she waited on the motorcade route near the Green Line. I hope he brings unity and peace to Lebanon. Back to the article now. This time was no different, except instead of a civil war, it was a war that Hezbollah launched and lost against Israel. Israel is preparing another assault on Lebanon. That's perhaps one of the things people were most grateful for about the Pope's visit. It would make Israel hold off from its daily bombing rate. Hezbollah is under a lot of pressure internationally, regionally, and domestically over its military role and the growing perception that its decisions no longer reflect Lebanese consensus, as if they ever did. Into this moment walked Pope Leo XIV, and Hezbollah tried to scramble. The attempt to attach itself to the visit. From the moment the visit was announced, Hezbollah moved quickly to ensure it would not be symbolically sidelined. Scouts appeared in strategic locations. Party-adjacent media figures began packaging the visit as an implicit validation of, quote-unquote, Lebanese resilience. Influencers aligned with Hezbollah attempted to weave the event into a narrative of coexistence, national unity, and mutual respect that goes against how Hezbollah treats its own supporters, much less those that disagree with it. The motivation was obvious. At a time when the party faces increasing isolation politically, diplomatically, and within large swaths of Lebanese society, it could not afford for the Pope's presence to appear as anything other than inclusive of all Lebanese spheres, including its own. But the moment and the Pope didn't play along. Just like he shut down Queen Rania of Jordan's shameful comment on a caught on hot mic, trying to discourage him from visiting Lebanon. The Pope's message was unambiguous. When Pope Leo XIV explicitly called on all armed actors, including Hezbollah, to put their weapons down and return authority to the state, it punctured the party's attempt to appropriate the visit. Quoting Vatican News, the message from Hezbollah, the Pope is asked, the Pope replies, yes, I saw it. Clearly, on the part of the Church, there is a proposal that they lay down their arms and that we seek dialogue. But beyond this, I prefer not to comment at this time. It was not framed as an attack, nor as a sectarian statement. It was framed as a simple principle. A functional country cannot have competing armies. It is the same message repeated by every international body, every constitutional scholar in Lebanon, and every person not aligned with Hezbollah. But coming from the Pope on Lebanese soil, during a moment of acute regional tension, it carried a moral clarity that Hezbollah could not easily absorb or ignore. It meant that they can't stop skirting what they agreed to do after losing a battle they instigated. And so, the failed counter-narrative began almost instantly. The disingenuous counter-argument. Within hours, Hezbollah-affiliated influencers launched a coordinated line of reasoning. If Catholics can follow the Pope, why can't Hezbollah follow Ali Khamenei? Presented as a question of religious freedom, it was a textbook reframing tactic, shifting the conversation away from military decision-making and national sovereignty toward cultural and sectarian equivalence. But the equivalence break down almost immediately. Catholics following the Pope concerns doctrine, faith, and personal belief. Hezbollah following Khamenei concerns decisions of war, peace, and national security. Matters that directly affect the entire Lebanese population, regardless of sect, belief, or political position. Lebanon does not pay the price of alleged Catholic obedience to the Vatican. And here I say alleged because remember, the Lebanese church and right-wing mouthpieces still defend convicted child molester priest Mansour Labaki, even after the Vatican convicted him and defrocked him, along with the French courts. However, Lebanon does repeatedly pay the price for Hezbollah's military obedience to a foreign state and the Ayatollah's wishes for better negotiating positions. Attempting to merge the two is not only inaccurate, it is a deliberate attempt to obscure their core issue. And not even Hezbollah's influence can take it seriously because of how disingenuous it is. Lebanon's structural reality. Lebanon's crisis is not about religious authority or coexistence. Despite Hezbollah's constant and aggressive attempts to reduce the entire Shia community to just Hezb, the reality is that is not true, not by a long shot, especially after Hezbollah's defeat and its decision to stand against October 17, 2019 uprising that started in areas and neighborhoods Hezb claims to be its own. I haven't forgotten that. They want you to forget that. The current crisis is about a monopoly of force. It is about whether a state can function when an armed group retains the ability to unilaterally start or end conflicts with a neighboring country. It is about whether a state can function when an armed group retains the ability to unilaterally start or end conflicts with neighboring entities or countries. And it is about the democratic impossibility of a political system in which one actor is not accountable to the institutions the rest of us must live under. The Pope's statement was not an attack, but a reiteration of a principle that any sovereign country requires: a single unified authority over weapons and war that is democratically controlled, not with Hezbollah car bombs and militias ineffective against Israel, but only effective against unarmed Lebanese who don't bend the knee. No rhetorical pivot can change that. Why did Hezbollah's narrative fall flat? Hezbollah misread the room badly. It is so stuck in its past glory days, it is incapable of doing anything else. Lebanese exhaustion has reached a level where symbolic gestures no longer land. That includes segments of society Hezbollah considers, quote-unquote, theirs. The population has lived through a collapsed banking sector, a hollowed-out state, rolling blackouts, border clashes, drone strikes, and the constant threat of escalation, and none of which they have chosen or can control. So when the Pope called for disarmament, most Lebanese heard something they have long wanted themselves. And when Hezbollah tried to frame the visit as an issue of religious double standards, the response across the digital public sphere was muted at best or dismissive at worst. Their pick-me energy was more cringe than believable. There is a growing understanding that Lebanon can no longer carry the weight of a permanent militia structure that makes decisions on behalf of millions who did not consent to those decisions. What the visit ultimately revealed: the Pope did not shift Lebanese political dynamics. He did not broker a new consensus. He did not break Hezbollah's entrenched position. But his presence exposed something important. Hezbollah is increasingly sensitive to how it is perceived, increasingly isolated, and increasingly reliant on narrative management to justify its continued militarized role. I'd even say it's desperate. I don't believe carrying the Vatican flag along with the Nasrallah photo is sincere. It's just to say, see, look how tolerant we are. Now, let's forget we agreed to disarm after we lost the war we started, and give us some slack for this performative stuff. We're just trying to bask in the coverage that the Pope's visit brings. In that sense, the Pope's message landed exactly where it needed to. Not as a command, not as a condemnation, but as a reminder. Lebanon cannot survive indefinitely with its sovereignty held hostage to parallel structures, not even ones that portray themselves as guardians of national dignity, when that has never been the case in reality. In that clarity, many Lebanese found something rare. An articulation of the obvious, delivered without fear and platitudes meant to waste time, hoping that some miracle that will never come will help Hezbollah get back to its peak, which even they know is never gonna happen again.